Részlet a Nova harmadik évadának 9. epizódjából, amely a Tudat és túlvilág címet viseli.
Nézzünk most meg pár jelenetet Daniel Drasin dokumentumfilmjéből, amelynek a címe Calling Earth. Azaz a Föld hívása, vagy Földet hívják.
Now, according to science, when you physically die and when your brain stops functioning, that is it. That is the end. That's the end of consciousness.
One day in the summer of 2002, Martha Copeland of Lawrenceville, Georgia, played back a sound recording she'd made earlier that day and heard the voice of her daughter Kathy disciplining her dog. That wouldn't have been so unusual, except that 6 months earlier, Kathy had died in an auto accident. In September 2005, Vicki Talbot of Bellingham, Washington, received a message on her answering machine from her son, Braden. Braden had been dead for over 4 years. In January 1994, Mark Macy of Boulder, Colorado, received a telephone call. The caller identified himself as a European psychologist named Konstantin Raudeva.
This is Konstantin Raudeva speaking.
Dr. Raudeva had been dead for 20 years. One day in October 1987, Claude and Ellen Thorlund of Sweden switched on their TV. Suddenly, this strange image appeared, and they quickly snapped it with their Polaroid camera. Only later did they learn that their friend Friedrich Jürgensen, a pioneering afterlife researcher who had died a few days earlier, was being buried at that very moment, 250 miles away. For more than a half-century, people throughout the world claim to have communicated with the dead using instruments of modern technology, such as tape recorders, radios, telephones, computers, and video systems. They call this phenomenon instrumental transcommunication, or ITC.
I think the reason that they choose to communicate with us like this is because this is the electronics age. This is what we accept.
The structure of the human voice.
In recent years, ITC has increasingly captured the attention of serious researchers, including doctors, engineers, and physicists, as well as scientific investigators of the paranormal. It has given rise to books, scientific reports, and international conferences held on both sides of the Atlantic. What's really going on here? Mainstream science tells us that nothing survives the death of our physical bodies. But that doesn't stop the flow of whispered voices, images, and verifiable information that seems to be flooding in from what some believe to be human minds inhabiting another dimension of existence. Is it possible that materialistic science has been misinterpreting the nature of human consciousness, and therefore dismissing valid evidence for the conscious survival of physical death?
Science is a method of inquiry, not an ideology. And at present there are many scientists who believe in materialism, but this is really a belief structure or a philosophy. And science as a method of inquiry doesn't have to be committed to a particular worldview.
Science appears to preclude the possibility of an afterlife, but science evolves and there's no knowing what possibilities may be acceptable to a future science.
After 26 years of doing research and investigation in this field, I've concluded that there's more than enough evidence that there is life after death, that we survive our body's deaths.
The notion that hard evidence for an afterlife might be staring us in the face may be a stretch for most scientists. But that hasn't discouraged many respected researchers from studying such phenomena as near-death and out-of-body experiences, reincarnation, mediumship, and instrumental transcommunication. At the grassroots of this growing movement, practitioners around the globe claim to be conversing with the deceased through the most common and accessible form of ITC. It's known as the electronic voice phenomenon.
A brief definition of the electronic voice phenomenon, or EVP as we call it, would be the existence of voices of unknown origin which appear in tape recordings particularly, but could also be recorded in other ways. When I first heard EVP, the EVP that I produced and I knew was real and not just something that people said, it changed my whole life in that I then really wanted to devote my work and what talents I have to researching this thing.
Electronics engineer Alexander McRae lives on the Isle of Skye off the coast of Scotland. A leading expert in voice communication systems, he developed speech enhancers for the Space Shuttle and voice links for the London Underground. When he first heard about EVP, he was convinced it was an alarming fraud aimed at exploiting the vulnerability of the bereaved.
I'd had a high-level security clearance in the UK and the US, so, I'd been into some quite fancy things, but I didn't believe this.
With his expertise in speech communications, he started recording EVP in an attempt to discredit it.
And then one evening, to my great surprise, with some equipment I was developing at the time, I heard a voice. My reaction was not fear, but something close to it. I was really startled.
McRae was even more amazed when he discovered additional voices on the same tape.
The first one was actually my father's voice. And what he said, I recognized the voice, what he said was a typical phrase that he used. He used it so much, in fact, that it became his nickname. So I became reasonably convinced that this was the electronic voice phenomenon that people had been talking about.
After 25 years of research, McRae is one of the world's leading experts in EVP.
What my research has convinced me is that there is another dimension to our existence, and that includes life after death.